All right.
Welcome to another exciting episode of the Andre The Beast Show. Today we're going to dive into the world of science, research, and education. One thing I can honestly say about the Andre Show, not only do we talk about that peace mindset, but we also educate the viewers. And today is definitely one man's journey to educate the youth, to inspire, but not just through math, reading, history, more importantly, science. And let me explain it a little bit deeper. The importance of science. Science helps us to create vaccines, to grow. It also works in farming. Agriculture. We need science for every aspect of our lives. So today, we have a young man who I don't even know how he got into science. He's going to let us exactly how that journey went. Without further ado, Andre Samuel. What's up, big guy?
Hey, what's up, Andre? How you doing? Good to see you.
I am doing great. You know, a doctor of science. Before we get down, just tell the viewers a little bit about who you are.
Wow, yeah. So, like you said, I'm a doctor of science. I have a PhD in biology. My focus is on molecular modeling of proteins in bacteria to find new drugs and new antibiotics. That's what my PhD was focused on. But I grew up in DC. Right. So I grew up in the DMV. I grew up in Northwest DC, actually in DC, not in PG County or Virginia or on the outskirts, but right in the heart of the city during the 90s, 70s, 80s and 90s, during the crack era and everything else. And I was just always this like sort of nerdy kid, you know what I'm saying, that I liked the traditional things. I liked, Kung Fu theater on Saturday mornings. I liked the after school cartoons and G.I. Joe and all that, but I also loved science. And so I was always the kid that kind of wanted to know how things worked, right? Like, why did the leaves fall off every fall and winter? And why did they change colors? Like, there's a process that it's going through. I grew up a tinkerer. So when my mom had radios and lights and things that didn't work and she would throw them out, I would pull them out and like get her screwdrivers in the toolkit and pull it apart and try to figure out what's wrong with it. And then I would fix it. So that was just always my thing as a kid, right? But I was also like troubled because I grew up in DC, but I was adopted by my mom, who was a Black single woman at the time, and we were poor and we struggled and all of that. So I struggled as a kid, like when it came to like my behavior in school and stuff like that, and didn't have the best grades, but I always wanted to be a scientist. You said you was adopted. About what age were you adopted? So I was raised in DC, but I was born in Germany, right? So I was adopted about 4 or 5 years old. My father was a Black soldier stationed in the army there. He was a Vietnam vet. And he met a local German woman there. Her name was Monica. And they had 3 of us. They had me and I had 2 younger sisters. At about 4 years old, we left the U.S. because my father was coming back to the U.S. And we moved to New York, to the Bronx. And within a few months or so, I ended up being adopted by my mom. And I wouldn't find out until I was older that the woman who adopted me was actually my father's estranged wife. He had been married to her legally, but they were separated. And so she kind of came and scooped me up and rescued me from him because, he was a pretty bad alcoholic. He's like a violent alcoholic. So but that's how I ended up being adopted.
What happened to your other two siblings?
My sisters?
Yeah.
So my sisters both live in Houston. One was adopted by another family, and then the youngest sister lived back and forth in between my biological parents. So like they would kind of send her back and forth between the two of them every few, every so often.
How did you guys manage to stay connected? Because we didn't have cell phones.
Right. Yeah. I mean, My middle sister, Andrea, I probably hadn't seen her since the day we separated. And that was when I was 4 years old. I saw her again for high school graduation. And that was how we got reconnected. My parents made arrangements to surprise me for high school graduation and ended up getting all three of us together for the summer. My youngest sister, Tina, we had always seen each other. So I kept in touch with my dad. He would come up and visit every now and then. And when he had Tina and had visitation or whatever with Tina, sometimes we would be together. So we kind of saw each other every now and then as we were growing up. And it wouldn't be until like we became like adults that we actually started to kind of, get back together.
What kind of memories do you share with each other? That's almost like borderline childhood trauma for all of you guys. How do you when you guys first I know when it happened, but you don't really talk about it. Now you're older. Like what are some of the threads that you guys share?
I mean, we're still kind of estranged at this point, right? Like, I think that one of the things that we've done is I've done in the past is like I would go to Houston once a year for a conference. Like I go there every year for a conference at the NASA site, and I would make sure that I reach out to them and kind of connect with them, right? And actually, my biological mother is still alive, the one that left me. She's still alive, and she lives in Houston, in the same city as my two sisters. So I go there once a year and check them out, holler at them and come by, see my mom and stuff like that. But lately things started to get like a little crazy, like being around some of my siblings, like just would be really uncomfortable, and it would end up being like a fight or something like that. And so I just got to the point where the past few years, I kind of kept my distance.
You mentioned that it was what I'm trying to do is paint a narrative of struggle, and out of the pain and the struggle came a brilliant doctor. So let's go back a little bit more. You talked about trying to fit in, trouble kid. Elaborate a little bit on that for the young kids who are watching this.
I was always a bright kid, right? But I was a troubled kid. And I think that's the way I look at it. I mean, I had abandonment issues. I knew who my biological parents were, but I wasn't being raised with them. I was being raised by a woman that I called mom that I knew wasn't my biological mother, but for all intents and purposes and everything that she gave me was my mother. And to this day is the only person I refer to as my mom, right? But I mean, look, I like to say things like I grew up at a time where being mixed and being light skinned wasn't cool, not unless you were Albie Shore or Prince, right? Like I remember times where I would walk down the hallway and kids would sing "Play That Funky Music, White Boy," right, and stuff like that. Yeah. So I mean, and this was at a very early age. We're talking first, second grade, right? So I grew up on the Jeffersons. I grew up on Fred Sanford and stuff like that, Sanford and Son. But one of the things I always remember starkly was like George Jefferson calling Allen a zebra, right? Because he was mixed. And so, you got a lot of that as kids and stuff like that. So I really did struggle with self-identity for some time as a youngster. I really did. I was a science nerd. Everybody around me either wanted to like hustle or be known as hustling, or was into sports, right? Like football, basketball, and stuff like that. And I played those things, but I played those things recreationally. I did not play on organized teams, right? Right. So there was issues trying to fit in. I would eventually succumb to the trauma and the issues because immediately after high school, I graduated. I went to Tuskegee University, and I wasn't prepared both mentally and educationally. But I eventually got into legal trouble. Ended up copying, or pleading to a felony, and then very soon after that, got hooked on crack cocaine and went all out. homelessness, living on the streets, shelters, all of that for a few years. And then that's when I realized, like, I'm kind of tired of this. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm tired of this. And worked to get myself clean and get myself back together, and then went back to school and continued to pursue my original career goals of wanting to obtain a doctorate degree and become a scientist. At the time, I wanted to be a veterinarian, but I switched to wanting to become a scientist.
You mentioned some profound stuff. From drug addiction, homeless. I mean, to look at you. You would not even expect any of that happening. But my question here is, who did you have to help you pick up the pieces?
I mean, all along the way? I say all along the way.
He was going in that dark spot. He was dealing with trying to come out of rehab, but a conviction, and really trying to get yourself back into college. And we're talking about part two of this question. Why did you pick Tuskegee? Because I know exactly what that is. That's a prestigious college.
Yeah. All right. So part two is I chose Tuskegee because I want to be a veterinarian, and we found out that Tuskegee was the only HBCU to have a veterinary program, and it was one of the top veterinary programs in the country. So I decided, I'm in DC, so I'm in there. I'm with Howard and I'm with UDC, two very strong historically Black colleges and universities. But I went there because they had a pre-vet program. And so the idea was I would go there, absorb and live in the history of our people, but also was at one of the top veterinary institutes in the country. And so that was why I went to Tuskegee. Yeah.
So who wound up to make these transitions? Because we're talking about an addiction. You got to have somebody to help you. I don't know. I heard it's a hard thing to get out of.
Yeah. I talk about this in my documentary. I don't know that there was really anyone that came to me and helped, right? Like, I think what happened was I knew that there was a better life than what I was living at the time. I was fortunate enough where, despite all the, let's say some of the childhood trauma and everything that I went through, being teased and trying to fit in, I, for the most part, there were parts of my childhood that were really good. My mom was really good. I had been to college for a few years already. I knew what life was like outside of those streets. I just had a hard time trying to figure out how to kick the habit so I could get back to that life. And so I ran into a brother on the street who was talking to me one day. I think I was panhandling, and he said, dude, you don't sound like you belong on these streets. What you doing here? Right. And he gave me his number. He said, if you ever feel like you want to get clean or whatever, give me a call. I do not remember this brother's name to this day. But he said, give me a call. And one day I got tired. I had his number. I gave him a call. He picked me up and dropped me off at a rehab facility. And that was it. I'd never seen that dude again after that.
Wow.
Right. But I had never seen the rock or the pipe again after that either. And so that was what led me to
I'm glad
start the recovery process and start getting back to life and obtaining goals and stuff like that.
Congratulations.
Thanks, brother.
You're back on track. You're back at school. Now you want to get into your passion. I call this your purpose.
Right.
You start following your dreams to be a scientist. What was that like for you?
It was awesome, actually. It was exciting. It was I felt like I was finally doing what I was meant to do. I had struggled for some time trying to figure out what to do. Right. I got clean. I was clean for a few years. I was waiting tables at a restaurant called Houston's in Georgetown. And I noticed that all the other waiters, for the most part, were also in school. And so I was like, well, I need to do something. I can't just keep, waiting tables the rest of my life. And so, that's that was sort of the journey and the process. And when I finally decided to go back to school, I said, I'm going to take one class during the summer, and it's going to be the hardest class I ever took. Right. And if I pass this class, then I know it's my sign to go back and finish going to school. And so I was working full time, and I took the summer class, and it was a math class because I sucked at math. Terrible at math, dude. You're like, dude, you're a scientist. How did you suck at math? I just sucked at math, right? I just couldn't get it. Yeah. I didn't know how to study it. Then I figured out how to study it, and I got better, and I passed that class, and I was like, this is it, man. I'm on. And so I remember like being on the buses and the train and having my books open and like studying, like, and not looking at studying as a task or something that I had to do, but like as a way of like obtaining new knowledge and sucking up this new knowledge and being able to move forward with this knowledge and make better decisions, you know what I'm saying, as I go forward. So yeah, it was phenomenal to be able to go back. It was like the best thing I'd ever done.
So when you go to school to be a scientist, how did you know which part of the science area that you really want to focus on and why?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. For me, it was very organic, Andre. I've always had a love and an interest in animals. I've always had a love and an interest in infectious diseases and how microbes cause these little tiny, tiny things that we can't even see can take us down. You know what I'm saying? In a heartbeat. So I've always had a fascination for that. Like my casual reading was around infectious diseases in animals. And so I found that I found that there was such a thing called animal research. And I was like, whoa, I can blend both of these together. You know, like I got my love for animals and taking care of animals, but I also got my love for doing research in the lab. And now I found out that I can do both. I can do the research on the animals. Like that was butter for me. And so I started doing that very early on in my undergraduate career. I transferred my credits from Tuskegee to the University of the District of Columbia to UDC. Mm-hmm. And then right then and there is where I found my love for merging these two together.
What was your first Call of Duty when you graduated?
My first Call of Duty?
Yeah.
The video game?
No, you got your degree.
Right.
The degree.
Okay.
You're fascinated by disease and animal research and human research. But now you're done with college. Like, what is your call to mission? Now you got to figure out how do you put this to use.
Yeah. So when I finished my bachelor's degree in biology, I knew I was going on to the PhD. Like I knew that was my goal. So the first degree was not the terminal degree for me. My terminal degree was a bachelor's. But I also knew that my history and my grades weren't the strongest. So, right, how am I going to get into a PhD program? So what I did was I worked for a number of years on like really, really strong research projects. I worked at George Washington University at the School of Medicine and I worked underneath like the top vaccine expert and performed really well, showed them what I was made of, and got people like that on my side who could write letters of support for me, right? And when it was time to apply for the program. And I also figured that if I did a number of years working in research and getting publications in my name and getting, a research sort of record before I applied to grad school, that would hopefully create a more complete picture than just looking at the grades and seeing what my history was. Right. And so that's how I was able to do it. So I worked for a few years after my bachelor's. I worked in different research facilities. When I felt like I had conquered everything there, I went on and found a new place to move on to where I could, increase my arsenal of laboratory skills and animal research skills.
When you say laboratory skills, what do you mean when you say laboratory skills?
So things like techniques like they're common laboratory techniques that are used in a laboratory setting like PCR, which is making copies of DNA, DNA sequencing, DNA cloning, which is copying a gene and taking it out of one organism and putting it into another organism and getting that gene to work or produce an effect within that organism. Things like that. Like you see all these different pieces of equipment around in the lab. Like, I know how to use all this stuff, right? And I've learned how to use all this stuff over the years. So those are the types of things that I think made me more marketable when it came to applying to grad school.
What are some of the most interesting things that you've worked on that we as uneducated individuals may not even know about, or even perceive it?
Oh, wow. So I'll go with the most recent thing that I did like years ago, and that would be the work on tuberculosis, right? This tuberculosis, this infection of the lungs. About a third of the population is actually infected with tuberculosis, and we just don't know it. And I was actually part of the research team that did the work on a drug called Humira. You probably see it on TV all the time, and there are other drugs like it that say, hey, if you are taking Humira, you got to be checked for tuberculosis and make sure you don't have tuberculosis before you take it. I was part of the team that did the work that found that if you have tuberculosis and it's in a stage where you don't have the active disease, right? You don't show the disease, you just have it, and it's kind of trapped in your lungs, and your immune system is keeping it at bay, right? So you're not sick at all, but you got it in there. This drug we showed by injecting it into monkeys that have that form of the disease actually goes in and reactivates the tuberculosis and causes it to develop into active disease. And so that work that I did is what allowed Humira to come to market, but it's also the reason why you hear that little tag at the end where you should not take this drug if you have tuberculosis or are suspected of having tuberculosis, or make sure you get tested for tuberculosis first. So that's like the most recent thing that I could think of, that like whenever I see that commercial, I'm like, yeah, I did that work.
How much is animal research done to develop and to make antibodies or solutions for humans?
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of it is not necessarily synthesized using the animals, but it has to be tested. Right. So we have to test it. We almost every new drug that comes to market usually has to go into something that we call preclinical trials. Preclinical trials is a way of saying really sort of animal testing. Rats, mice, sometimes rabbits are usually the ones that they're tested on. But you have to test to make sure that it's not toxic. You have to test to make sure it doesn't cause cancer, and any other sort of autoimmune effects and things like that. So that's where a lot of the animal research comes in at.
Why do we pick animals such as monkeys? And what was the third one you said?
We use rats, mice, rabbits, guinea pigs, hamsters. We use worms, fish. It all depends, right? So what you do, these are what we call animal models, right? It's a model, like a model plane. You look at it and like you learn from the model. You can learn from the model plane as you put it together or take it apart. But these animal models that we use serve as a model organism. And a lot of times they have the same characteristics or the same response that we as humans have. And so we're able to sort of predict what kind of response we will have by watching the response in these animals once we give them the medication or the drug.
So you mean even fish have somewhat of a common thread with humans? Or is DNA?
Yeah. I mean, fish, right? So with fish, a lot of times with zebrafish, or even these little microorganism type worms called C. elegans, a lot of times you can do genetic studies on them, right? So while their circulatory system might not be the same, or their nervous system might not be the same, right? Some of the genetic information could be the same, or the response to a genetic manipulation could be the same. Even with fruit flies, the vast majority of a good portion of the foundational work done on genes was done in fruit flies, right? Selecting for a specific gene in fruit flies to watch them mate with each other and see how they pass these genes on and what the results are. We can also manipulate some of those genes in fruit flies also. Same thing with these other animals. They all have very different characteristics that seem very similar to what goes on inside our body.
Does our genetic code change every day? And if so, what are some of the contributing factors that alter and change our genetic makeup? We're seeing a lot of evolution. More evolution in the mind more than I am body. But this is your expertise. Are we rapidly changing genetics? And if so, how are we doing it? Is it by pharmaceuticals? Is it by vaccination? Or is it just environmental factors?
Sure. That's a great question, man. Look, so there are, I think it's safe to say that there are probably some sort of minute changes going on in your DNA at some point, daily or close to it, if not daily. Simple things like going out into the sun without sunblock can cause, a change in the DNA in one of your cells. That's quite possible. The problem becomes when you start to have lots of changes and a lot of cells in the same place, or that change in the cell causes a change that results in the cell constantly dividing, right? That's what cancer is, right? Cancer is simply one cell that cannot stop making copies of itself. It's lost the ability to make copies of itself. So yeah, I mean, there are all kinds of things that can affect the DNA in your body. Smoking, what you eat, epigenetics is a whole new branch of study that studies the effects of these environmental factors that can change your DNA. So it's a lot of things that can affect it and change it. The chances are, right, like, you're not just going to get like one sort of simple change in your genetic makeup and then all of a sudden, there's a problem. It has to be usually a significant change, something we call a mutation in the DNA. And that mutation usually results in your body either being able to do something a little bit more than it normally did, or it can no longer do something that it used to do, right? Like this cell, like cancer, it is what we call a gain of function mutation. It gained the ability to keep making copies of itself. And that's what causes the disease. And that's why organs get so much bigger and bigger, and so because this one cell just keeps dividing, right? It takes up the blood supply and everything else.
How can you reprogram that genetic code? If you recognize this particular gene strand, is it possible to remove that genetic marker and put in a healthy genetic marker? Have research been done like that?
Yeah, you're talking about a process called CRISPR-Cas9, right? This is CRISPR-Cas9, which is a technique where you use this enzyme called CRISPR, which can actually go into the body. It can recognize the mutated area of the gene, cut it out, and replace it with the correct sequence of the gene. We can actually do this now with sickle cell. There's a treatment for sickle cell anemia, right? Sickle cell anemia is caused by a genetic mutation in your red blood cells that prevents your red blood cell from holding on to oxygen, right? And that misshape. But that misshape and that process can be treated in the person by using CRISPR. And CRISPR can go in recognize the cells that have all these mutations, cut them out, and put in the right ones. We're seeing this.
How come doctors haven't released this
release this
information?
information?
I know individuals in my own family
that have
sickle cell,
sickle
and
cell,
and I know they're going to the
back
doctor.
in the day.
Back in the day,
They told her
that she wouldn't even live to be
18 and
all these different age.
And now
Yeah.
you're telling me
New technology. She can
she
go there now.
and
Be treated.
It's quite possible, yes. People are using this technique to treat it. Matter of fact, there's a really cool, we just created a program where we use this really cool virtual reality program to teach students and kids about this process inside the human body. So you put on the headset and you actually end up going inside the human body, inside the blood vessels, inside the blood cells, and seeing how this enzyme comes in and attaches to the DNA, cuts it out, and removes it. And then you get to see how the cells are all misshapen and how they flow through the body and the blood vessels if they're not misshapen. And when they are misshapen as a result of sickle cell, you can see how the blood clots and prevents it from going through the blood vessels. And this is all immersive, like in the headset. Like it's pretty dope. So yeah, that is a really cool technology that has been developed to help address issues like sickle cell. Yep.
How important is mental health related to genetic healing and reproduction?
Sure. So I mean, that's very, 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 they're very connected. They're very connected, right? You have a number of mental health issues that are a result of genetics. But you also have mental health issues that are a result of the environment and chemicals and other things that develop later on. So it does play a role. It's not the only role, but it certainly does play a role. One could argue that if there is a gene for depression is isolated. If a gene for depression is isolated, then that gene can also be passed down. But it all depends on, I think, a number of other factors as well. Just having that gene doesn't necessarily mean that you'll suffer from depression, but it does mean that you could have a propensity to suffer from depression. And we see that depression is handed down, from generation to generation, genetically at times.
Would that be called genetic part wiring?
It's a good question.
It's almost like the roller pigeon.
The roller pigeon?
Yeah. They use that in conjunction with genetic hardwiring. Almost what you was just talking about.
The mother has this,
and has this,
you're going to wind up like that.
Right. Yeah. Very similar.
Let me ask a deeper question.
You study
DNA.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about junk DNA.
About who?
Junk DNA.
Junk DNA. Oh, yeah.
What's your take on that?
So that's funny. So the first time I heard the term junk DNA, I was working on my master's in genomics and bioinformatics at George Washington University. And I remember this professor said, we were talking about sequencing DNA in the Human Genome Project, because that was right around the time that it had started.
Right.
And I remember he said, like, this other stuff. He said, we got coding genes, we got exons and introns. He said, this other stuff, we don't know what that is. It's called junk DNA. And I right away thought to myself, that's ridiculous. Right. What a ridiculous term to use, because what is junk? Junk is stuff that we just kind of toss away and we don't use it. It doesn't have a function, right?
Right.
If we know anything about biology, us as biologists know one thing: the body, the cell, does not make anything that it does not need. It doesn't make anything that it does not need. It doesn't, right? So I'm like thinking to myself, there's got to be other things behind it and other reasons. It's not just junk DNA. And of course, 10 to 20 years later, we find out, right, that these different they serve as different sequences. They have different purposes. Like junk DNA is not a term that any scientist who is current today uses to describe artifactual DNA that we don't understand the purpose of, because I think we know now. everything that the body makes has a function. And if the body doesn't need it to function, or the cell doesn't need it to function, it will stop making it. So that's exactly why the term use it or lose it is absolutely applicable to our bodies and to biology.
Let's go back one more time. I'm going to ask all kinds of questions. I'm sorry. I'm like the student now.
So we're going there.
So let's just say, for instance, that they did use this terminology of junk DNA. I agree with you 100%. Body, but if it's in the body, it's there for a reason, and we have the genetic markers to let us know if something's wrong with the body, whether it's sweat, whether it's fever. We have some genetic markers. So let's go back a little bit deeper. If scientists didn't know what this DNA was, how do we activate the so-called junk DNA? Are there markers or whatever in our body that are shut off that prevents us from really understanding how to use this so-called missed DNA?
All right, so I'm trying to understand your question. So. How do we turn on that missing link? That missing link called junk DNA. Well, see, that's the thing. We never turned it on. I mean, we don't turn it on ourselves, like, willingly, right? What I think what happened was that they used the term junk DNA because they weren't sure what it was, what it did, right? But the sequence for that. Let's say we have a sequence, a region on the genetic, let's say we have a region within the genetic code. It's a small sequence. It maybe has 20 what we call base pairs. Base pair is each letter, right? DNA is made up of A, T, C, G, right? Those letters in a specific sequence makes a specific gene. So we got a specific sequence with these letters. We don't know what they do. We can come back to it many, many years later because that sequence is going to be pretty much exactly the same, right? It's not going to change. Mm-hmm. But what will change is what we refer to that sequence as. Prior to, we didn't know what it was. We called that sequence junk DNA. And there's a whole bunch of other sequences on that line of DNA. We don't know what it is, so we call it junk DNA. Somewhere along the line, somebody else did some research on that specific region and found out that that specific region has a function. Now we can no longer call that region junk DNA. So junk DNA is really just sort of a place name holder until we figure out what it was, until we figure out what it is. And it's when we figure out what it is that and what its function in the body is that we have a better understanding of what it is. We don't really turn on, our bodies are probably already using the junk DNA. We just don't know it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because it's there for a reason. Right. It's there serving a purpose. We just haven't identified what that purpose is. Every piece of DNA or every strand of DNA or every sequence of DNA that we have in our body does not necessarily result in producing a protein, which results in producing an enzyme. And so I think that is where a lot of us were sort of in the dark early on when we started studying genes, right? We knew genes encoded to a protein, but there were sequences on DNA that were not genes. So not all DNA is a gene, and all genes are made from DNA, but not all DNA are genes.
Let me ask another question. I'm sorry. We like to
Yeah. Let's go.
So let's talk about cancer for a minute. Cancer's relationship to carbohydrates, aka sugar. Mm-hmm. They go into. If I'm saying this right, cancer cells are attracted to sugar.
I'm not sure. Don't know. I can't say that I've ever heard that.
What is the relationship between carbohydrates and DNA and just genetics in general? A lot of people today suffer from sugar addiction.
Right.
So here's that relationship to cells and DNA.
Yeah. So here's the thing, right? So sugar was initially designed or created to initially be sort of like a treat, right? But now what we're doing is sugar is in pretty much everything, every staple of the diet in some way, right? Either to make it taste sweeter or make it taste better or something. I mean, shoot, I remember just real quick. I remember eating that pizza at school lunch, and I was like, "Yo, this pizza tastes like it got a lot of sugar in it, right? Like it's sweet." Here's the thing with things like sugar. When we ingest molecules, when we ingest food, those foodstuffs get broken down into individual molecules. Those molecules will bind with a particular molecule in your body. And then that binding causes a specific reaction in your body. And that's exactly what happens with sugar. Your sugar, you got a whole bunch of sugar, glucose molecules in your blood and in your body, right? Those glucose molecules are binding with other enzymes and other molecules in your body that cause a signal relay down the line in your body that tells it to do a specific something or other. One of the things that is known is like if you have if you're already sort of saturated with sugars and you already have the nutrients that you need and you drink a whole bunch of sugar, your body is going to bind to that sugar, is going to realize that it has too much sugar in the system already, and it has to store the sugar. Mm-hmm. So what's it going to do? It's going to store the sugar, right? So it stores it in different places in different cells. And then eventually, when that is saturated, it starts to store energy in other forms. These forms are fat cells, right? So that's what fat cells are. They're high energy cells that are just kind of sitting around waiting to be used up. If you're constantly saturating your body with sugars and foodstuffs, there's no need for your body to use what it's storing. But what it's going to do is going to keep storing the stuff.
Does this minimize the effectiveness of the mitochondria?
I don't know. I haven't seen any studies that say that it does. I mean, mitochondria are essentially the workhorse of the cells and produce all the ATP. Right. So I don't know, or I'm not familiar with any research that shows that the mitochondria is affected by the presence of adipose or high sugar. That I don't know. The mitochondria doesn't necessarily work off of sugar itself. Like sugar doesn't bind to it. ATP synthesis is done through a enzyme called ATP synthase, and so that usually involves a number of different other molecules, not sugar.
You're a scientist. As we age, we begin to lose bone density, muscle mass, memory loss, the whole 9 yards. What's your take on the importance of protein and amino acids being ingested into the body in higher dosages as we age?
Well, so we as men got to be careful, okay? Because too much protein can lead to a condition called gout. All right. And so what happens is, like, yes, you want to have, I think it's a good idea to have lean protein in your diet. Chicken, fish, seafood, stuff like that. Lean ground beef every now and then, maybe a steak every now and then. But if you have a heavy ground beef or red meat diet, you also got a heavy cholesterol and fat diet, right? Like that marbling that you see in ground beef and in steaks, that's all fat. So if you're eating all that fat is going to get stored into your body. It can cause the blockage in your arteries and stuff like that. So those are the kinds of things I think that you got to be careful of and be aware of when it comes to your diet. So a high protein diet is good, but you can't have too much protein, because if you get a buildup of protein, we as men particularly develop gout, because what happens is you got too much protein that results in a high amount of uric acid crystals from the breaking down of those proteins, and those crystals build up. And that's how you end up with, the swollen feet and the gout and stuff like that. So a well-balanced diet protein, but then also making sure you got enough roughage and cellulose and fiber to kind of help move stuff through your body. The other thing is ground beef and meat, that sits in you, like it sits in you for a while.
What's a while?
You don't
Is it 7 days? Is it 7 days? Is it 2 weeks?
What's usually a while?
I mean, so the majority of it moves through your body. Like it all depends on sort of your digestive system, right? It's like it all depends. I mean, look, some people poop once a week to once a month, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If you're doing that, then something is sitting in you a lot longer, right? But if you're more regular and you go on every day because you have a regular diet, then you don't have that problem. You don't have a problem with a whole bunch of food sitting in your gut and in your GI tract because you're moving regularly. And so I think it's important, right? This is kind of where I think, like, going back a little bit, a foundation in science or having some sort of education in science is not necessarily just for scientists, right? It needs to be for all of us, because if we have a basic understanding of science and biology, we have an understanding of what we're putting in our body and how it affects our body. And I think that's a big struggle for us, particularly for us as Black Americans, right? Like we are kind of lost, I think, in the sauce when it comes to what's good for our bodies and what we should be eating versus, what we shouldn't be, or what we should be eating more moderately versus, what we should be on a more regular basis and stuff like that. I think it's the same thing for society as a whole, particularly here in the United States. But our diet is a big problem with our health. Like it's a big factor. They are connected. You eat well, you're going to be well.
Let me ask you this question. I'm a professional retired bodybuilder. Naturally, I gave my share of protein. Look, I never had gout. Had a great digestive system. But I noticed something. When you go to the doctors, they always say cholesterol. And they always say it's genetic with our race. So let's keep going with this.
Yeah.
Is there a genetic marker that indicates hereditary cholesterol or health issues with race?
I am not aware of it. Haven't heard of it. I am not familiar with it. I can't say yes or no.
I'm sure you heard that too.
I could. I could probably do the research and find out really quickly. But I can't say that I've heard that. No.
Yeah, that kills me.
That kills me when you go to the doctor and the first thing they say is,
you got to watch your cholesterol
because amongst
your people, you guys have
it's hereditary. This is what it says.
Right. But it could also be just not hereditary, but just a matter of diet and habit, right? Like what it is that your normal eating habits and your exercise also, or lack of exercise, also contributes to your cholesterol levels. It's not just genetic.
So you can change
that so-called genetic. Say, for instance, doctors use that word genetic.
You can change the genetic marker or the genetic code if it's there. By, like you said, eating habits, exercising, doing something different than the norm.
Right. Well, you can't change the genetic code, but what they're saying is that you genetically have a propensity to have this issue. You have so let's say if it was a race between you and this thing, right? It has a head start because it has a genetic marker for it. But yes, you are absolutely right. You can counter that genetic marker by eating right, eating healthy, exercising, and so on, right? So there are ways to counter it and keep it balanced.
We're going to keep going.
This is by education. I'm hooked now.
I mean, look, I'm 53 years old. My cholesterol is in tip-top shape. It's in tip-top shape,
right?
And I'm Black just like you, and I feel like we got the same genetic markers, and for the most part, our DNA is pretty much the same. But I spent 30 of my 53 years You know what I'm saying? Making sure I exercise, eat right, and so on. It might even been 40.
Right.
But, yeah.
Let me ask you a question. We talked about DNA. Let's go back to who they consider the father of DNA or human identification. Charles Darwin.
He's the father of evolution. Yeah.
What do you think evolution and DNA have in common? And what's your take on Charles Darwin as it relates to what you're studying?
So there were theories of the theories of evolution with Charles Darwin. I think is what sort of laid the groundwork for what we know about species and subspecies and division of species and so on, and how characteristics that are advantageous for a particular species are passed down from one to another, right? That's essentially what evolution is, right? You got a genetic mutation that allows you to have an advantage over the rest of the people in your group or subspecies, and you are able to pass that on along with other people, and the next thing you know, you have this new form of evolution, right? This new form of a species that has evolved over time. Okay. Now there were some holes in Darwin's theory, because Darwin's theory was also sort of rooted in a little bit of racism. All right, so we talk about that. But he wasn't a geneticist. From what I remember, he was more so an evolutionary biologist. So he made his observations based on, I think, the external observations of what he saw.
Environmental cause and factors.
Yeah. So when it comes to, like studying genes and stuff like that, he talked a lot about like how genes are passed on, but he wasn't necessarily a geneticist in the sense, right? When it comes to evolution, the evolution of us as a people, is that what you're asking about? Like, how do we?
Yeah.
What was the second part of your question? Sorry.
How connected are we genetically? How connected are we genetically as it relates to evolution? To animals? Because as it relates to animals, when you look at the primate, we're this. We evolved from this. When you look at the genetic code, we're closely related to the primate. Now they say we're closely related to the fish. I'm like, okay, how much DNA are they really telling us we are?
Well, so you got to remember, I think the theory is that all life sort of originated from one sort of living organism in soup, right? And that this primordial soup of cells and everything came together, and then they began to sort of evolve over the years.
Right.
So that really is the idea, right? So in that sense, yes, there is some sort of relation, but that relation is pretty distant, right? It's pretty distant. It's pretty far down what we call the phylogenetic tree. Which is this, it's like a DNA ancestry tree, but instead of, who your mom and pop and everybody is and your cousin and your uncles, what it is, it's a tree that connects us all to all the different species of animals based on where we evolved on the evolutionary timeline. So there is a relation there, but that's a pretty distant relation.
Sure. How much research have you guys in the United States have we collaborated with other countries? And if so, what has been the most provocative thing that you ran across with joint ventures from all countries as they studying the same thing you are?
Well, I mean, I think
what is the common thread?
Yeah, I mean, I can think of a couple things historically, right? So I think the HIV/AIDS crisis was one where I think it was phenomenal the way different countries and different scientists came together to try to figure out what this common cause agent was that was causing disease rapidly and across all communities. And then I think recently COVID. Right? Like all the different countries and researchers that came together to start doing as much research as they could on a brand new virus brand new strain of a virus that we had never really come in contact with before. I think those are two very significant examples of how the research community has come together from, basically a borderless research community has come together to help find solutions to problems that are affecting everyone in the world.
As a scientist, and you mentioned COVID.
As a scientist,
how did you approach this?
How did you approach this
unknown illness that attacked everybody, and
everybody,
and weak and the elderly? Like from a scientist standpoint,
from a scientist standpoint, how did you,
and more importantly,
approach it? And more importantly, you had to be also worried about your family as well as humans.
Yeah. So it was a scary time, but I approached it as I would, I think, any other infectious disease. So I personally am lucky enough as a research scientist where I've worked with infectious diseases, right? I've worked with tuberculosis. I worked in what's called a biosafety level 3 laboratory. There are 4 levels of biosafety laboratories. Biosafety level 1, 2, 3, 4. The higher the number, the more dangerous it is, right? So biosafety level 1 is can cause some disease, but it's not life threatening. Biosafety level 2 also can cause mild disease, but not life threatening. Biosafety level 3 is fatal if it's left untreated. Okay, biosafety level 1 and 2 they're not fatal. Biosafety level 3 is fatal if it goes untreated, but there is a treatment and cure for it. Then there's biosafety level 4, completely deadly, and there is no cure for it. So tuberculosis 3 is a biosafety level 3, right? And so years of working in that lab, I was able to, figure out what I need to do to minimize the spread of any sort of communicable diseases. I already had a laboratory of my own, so we had, resources like gloves and masks and disinfectant and stuff like that. So I followed protocol as if I was in a laboratory, but I did it at home. That's how I dealt with it, and that's how we did it in the lab. And that's how I think one of the ways we were able to survive the pandemic.
Before we wrap up, first of all, let me say thanks so much for coming on the show. But let's go a little bit before we close out. You have a foundation. You're helping bring science to a whole different level to the use of the world. Explain to me a little bit about the program, how that came about, and what's its mission.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So I created and run a nonprofit called the Citizen Science Lab. We were founded 10 years ago. We were created to create science pipelines for diverse and marginalized communities, for all communities through life-changing hands-on science experiences. And basically, how I came about this was when I was working on my PhD. I started a small program for high school kids in the city that came up on the summer and learned how to do science and learn how to do stuff in the lab. And when I graduated and finished my doctorate, I was able to secure $500,000 in startup funding and start this venture as a separate nonprofit. And I've been able to do it ever since. So we have 2 locations, one that's under construction right now. We got a $5 million construction project going on right now in the Hill District, which is a predominantly Black neighborhood in Pittsburgh. And we're moving on to sort of hopefully create new spaces in other cities, Philadelphia, Detroit, and so on. We were just created with the whole idea of the ideas that doing science is a hell of a lot more fun than reading about science. And that's how we get people interested in wanting to become a scientist. And that's what we do. We focus on youth, middle school, high school students, teach them how to do really cool stuff.
How was this being accepted into the area where you're at?
I mean, we're doing great. We're being very well received. We have the support of the community. People, love our workshops. We just recently had a groundbreaking to celebrate the beginning of the new construction site. We had the mayor of Pittsburgh. We had Congresswoman Summer Lee. We had councilmen. I mean, we had a lot of elected officials come out to support the work that we do, which was really moving, right? Because it's hard to get that recognition. So yeah, we're moving and shaking here, I think. Yeah.
How do you feel right now?
How do you feel right now? You
definitely have that beast mindset.
Hats off to you
going
for
through the fire
and
now smelling
the rainbow.
How did you realize what the purpose is? How does that make you feel?
How does that make you feel?
Makes me feel really good, to be honest, right? Like, I remember when I got clean, and the first time I got clean and like was leaving everything behind, and we didn't talk about this, but there were a few times where I probably almost lost my life, right? And I remember asking at the time that I started to get clean, it's like, God, I don't know what you saved me for, but I know you saved me for something.
Right.
And it wasn't until like I was able to create this facility. I remember one day I created the very first facility. It was brand new, and I walked in there and I just looked around and I looked at what I had built, and I was like, this is what it was. This is what I was saved for. And that was the epiphany for me. Yeah.
You actually manifested a childhood dream into reality.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Right.
How can the viewers
reach out to you and be part of your program?
You can find us on the web at www.thecitizensciencelab.org. We are on TikTok. We are on Instagram. We are on X or Twitter, whatever you call it nowadays, and Facebook and LinkedIn. If you just do a search in the web bar for The Citizen Science Lab, I'm guaranteeing you're going to find us very easily.
You know what, Andre? Dr. Andre, thank you so much for taking time out to come on the show. Definitely want you to come back and share more and more. Matter of fact, I want to talk to some of those students that are involved in your program and let them share their viewpoint on what it's like. I like the fact that you're doing something that people have clearly forgot about. We need scientists. It's like we need farmers. We need engineers, and we definitely need scientists. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another, and I do mean another exciting episode of the Andre The Beast Crayton. Cut. Now let's do the trailer. That was good.
Sure,
that was good. So
appreciate it, bro.
On this one, we're just going to say, next episode of the Andre The Beast Crayton Show, we're going into the lab. As soon as I say that, then you say, "Hi, this is Dr. Andre Simon on this episode. Join me, Dr. Andre Simon on this episode. Join me as I plop. Just a few bullet points, and I close it out.
Okay. All right.
Ready?
All right. Ready?
Two.
You ready?
Three.
Yep.
One. On the next episode of the Andre The Beast.
Hey, what's up? My bad.
Okay, as soon as I say live, then you come on.
Let's save that one for the blooper reel.
Ready?
All right, my bad. Go ahead.
1, 2, 3. On the next episode of the Andre The Beast Crayton Show, we're going into the lab.
Hey, everybody, this is Dr. Andre Samuel. Check us out on Andre The Beast Crayton Show.
Now you got to tell them what we're going to talk about.
Oh, and then what we're going to talk about. Okay.
Just a few bullet points.
Yeah. Okay.
We ready?
Gotcha. Okay, we ready?
1, 2, 3. On the next episode of the Andre The Beast Crayton Show, we're going into the lab.
Hey, everybody, this is Dr. Andre Samuel. Check me out on the Andre The Beast Crayton Show, where we're going to talk about the importance of science in our community and the importance of research and making sure that our youth are exposed to science education opportunities.
That and more on the next Andre The Beast Crayton Show.